In the fall of 1867, on a lonely stretch of road between Joplin and Springfield, Missouri, federal agents stumbled upon something that would darken the history of the Ozarks. Beneath the floorboards of Sullivan's trading post, investigators uncovered ledgers filled with the names, descriptions, and fortunes of more than 300 travelers. Each entry, written in careful Irish script, carried chilling details: route taken, Devil's Backbone Trail, expected return, none gold recovered, followed by the amount. The final entry, only 2 weeks old, read simply H. Zimmerman, German prospector traveling alone, estimated 8,000 in dust. Shaw grew uneasy. Patrick whispered, "We finish this one, then leave Missouri for good." What authorities found in that isolated post revealed one of the most elaborate murder conspiracies in post-Civil War America, a web of corruption that reached into the very core of power in southwest Missouri. But before we unravel the story of Patrick and Shaw Sullivan, make sure you're following Liturgy of Fear for more tales of dark history. And let us know in the comments what state you're listening from. The Sullivan brothers' tale doesn't begin with bloodshed, but with the land itself. The Ozark Mountains after the Civil War were wild and lawless, a place where federal control was weak and local justice was whatever armed men decided it to be. By 1867, the region simmered with unrest. The war had ended 2 years earlier, but its scars ran deep. Former Confederate guerrillas still prowled the forests as bandits, while Union veterans, many of them Irish immigrants who had fought for land and opportunity, struggled to survive in a land that met them with suspicion. It was into this turbulent world that Patrick and Shaw Sullivan arrived in 1864. They were brothers from County Cork who had fought with the 9th Missouri Infantry. Patrick, at 32, was sharp, calculating, and persuasive, able to win a stranger's trust within minutes. Shaw, 4 years younger and built like a fighter, believed force could fix what charm could not. Together they built a trading post at Hellhound Crossing, where the main road between Joplin and Springfield intersected with Devil's Backbone Trail, a dangerous shortcut through the Ozarks. The location was perfect, out of reach of regular patrols, but right where weary travelers passed through, eager for supplies, directions, or a safe place to rest. The building itself was modest, a log cabin with a false front to make it appear larger, stocked with basic goods and offering drink to anyone who stopped. What set it apart was not the structure, but the brothers themselves. Patrick's easy talk made visitors feel like insiders, while Shaw's silent, intimidating presence ensured no one asked too many questions. In 1867, the Ozarks were seeing a surge of wealth passing through. With the California gold rush winding down, miners were heading east, with their fortunes following familiar trails across Missouri. They carried not just gold and dust, but the savings of years of grueling labor in the Sierra Nevada. These were hardened men, suspicious and dangerous, yet vulnerable so far from law or protection. Local towns welcomed their money, but dreaded their tempers, as prospectors were quick to draw steel if cheated. Most merchants saw them as trouble, but the Sullivan brothers seemed born to handle them, playing the roles of trusted host and silent enforcer with chilling perfection. Prospectors who came to Hellhound Crossing were often rough, suspicious, and quick to anger. But after a few hours at the Sullivan trading post, they left, laughing, shaking hands, and carrying carefully drawn maps marked with so-called safe routes. What no one realized was that the Sullivan brothers had spent their first year in Missouri not just setting up a business, but weaving a web of influence and corruption that turned their trading post into the headquarters of one of the most profitable criminal networks the Ozarks had ever seen. The first crack in the illusion appeared in October of 1864, when Martha Hensley, the wife of a farmer, brought a basket of eggs to the back door of the post. It was just past sunset, the air sharp with wood smoke and fallen leaves, when she paused at the door and overheard voices drifting through the log walls. Patrick's Irish lilt blended with another man's voice, one she didn't know. The German fellow Klaus, the stranger, said he left 3 days ago with enough gold to buy half of Springfield. Took the Devil's Backbone trail like you told him. Should have made the main road by now, but nobody's seen him. Patrick's reply froze her in place. Well, that trail can be treacherous, especially for a man traveling alone. Wild country. Anything could happen out there. Bandits, animals, accidents. Who's to say? The stranger pressed on. It's too convenient every time you send someone that way. Before Patrick could answer, Shaw's deeper voice cut in full of menace. You questioning our judgment? Because if you are, maybe Sheriff Dalton would like to hear about it. The silence that followed carried more threat than words ever could. The stranger finally backed down, muttering about bad luck. Patrick chuckled and turned the conversation back to payment. Martha slipped away into the night eggs, still in hand, her heart pounding. But who could she tell Sheriff Dalton was Patrick Sullivan's drinking companion? Federal marshals rarely came through, and even if they did, what had she really heard? Fragments, suspicions, nothing concrete. She kept it to herself, a choice that would haunt her forever. Within 2 weeks, 3 more prospectors disappeared on the Devil's Backbone trail, and whispers in the communities around the Ozarks turned to panic. The pattern was always the same. A prospector arrived alone or with one companion, spent hours at the trading post drinking and talking with the brothers, and left with maps and supplies for the shortcut trail. They always left in good spirits, convinced they had been given valuable advice, and then they vanished without a trace. By December of 1864, the disappearances could no longer be ignored. In Springfield, Frederick Steinbeck, a German immigrant who ran a boarding house, began keeping track after his brother-in-law Klaus failed to arrive for Christmas. Klaus had written from California that he would reach Springfield by December 20th. When New Year's passed with no sign, Frederick began tracing his path. Every lead brought him back to the Sullivan post. Yes, they remembered Klaus, Patrick told him warmly. A fine fellow, spoke excellent English. Left November 18th, took the Devil's Backbone northeast. Patrick even produced a hand-drawn map, his face full of concern. Dangerous country, he warned. We told him not to go alone, but he was set on reaching family quickly. Shaw added that he had advised the main road, but Klaus was afraid of bandits, where the traffic was heavier. Frederick left unsettled. Their story fit together too neatly, their concern too genuine, but something about it gnawed at him. He returned 3 more times in the following weeks, trying to catch them in a lie, but the brothers were too skilled, too careful. By the spring of 1865, it was impossible not to see the trend. Travelers across the Ozarks were going missing in growing numbers, but the disappearances were never random. They clustered along the routes branching out from one place, the crossroads where Sullivan's trading post sat, like a spider at the center of its web. Local authorities gave little more than a shrug when people began demanding answers. Sheriff Thomas Dalton, a former Confederate cavalry officer who had slipped back into law enforcement after the war, dismissed the missing men as casualties of a violent frontier. He told citizens what they already knew. The hills were crawling with deserters, bushwhackers, and thieves, and any man carrying gold through that wilderness was risking his life. But behind closed doors, Dalton felt a growing unease. Not because he suspected the Sullivan brothers, quite the opposite. Patrick Sullivan had quickly become one of Dalton's most trusted informants, a man who always seemed to know where trouble was brewing. His tips had led to real arrests, stolen property being recovered, even the conviction of several known bandits. By all appearances, The Sullivans had done more to help restore order in 2 years than Dalton had managed in his whole career. So when Frederick Steinbeck kept pressing about his missing brother-in-law, Dalton shut him down hard. The Sullivan brothers are honest men. He told Frederick they've solved more crimes than they've caused. Stop harassing them with your fantasies. That was the end of official support, but not the end of questions. Families with loved ones who vanished kept talking, and their suspicions began to spread through quiet networks of letters and whispered conversations. While Dalton defended them, the Sullivans were building something far larger than anyone guessed. Their trading post had become more than a place to buy supplies. It was the nerve center of an intelligence operation. Every traveler who stopped for a meal or a drink unknowingly gave up valuable information, their destination, their companions, their wealth. Patrick carefully recorded it all, but the real details were hidden under a false floor in the back room, in notebooks that looked more like the work of a trained detective than a storekeeper. He had turned victim selection into a science. The ideal mark was a man traveling alone, usually just back from California, carrying gold and bound for family far enough away that his absence wouldn't raise alarms for weeks. The brilliance of their scheme wasn't just in choosing victims, but in the machinery that supported it. The killers themselves were only one piece. Merchants handled the laundering of stolen gold. Officials quietly steered investigations away. Even ministers vouched for the Sullivans' good Christian character. By 1866, the operation had grown so large, it was pumping wealth back into the communities around them. Blood money funded new churches, schools, and shops. The brothers donated generously to causes employed local men and never failed to treat their neighbors with courtesy. To outsiders, Patrick and Shaw Sullivan looked like model citizens, pillars of a recovering region. But behind the polite smiles and charitable gifts, the disappearances continued with the regularity of clockwork. Each one executed with the precision of a military campaign. The downfall of the Sullivan Empire didn't begin with a sheriff's badge or a marshal's warrant. It began with one grieving mother who refused to accept silence, who demanded answers when her son never returned from the road. That determination would spark the investigation that finally pulled back the curtain on the Sullivans' empire of blood. Elena McGreedy had already endured more than most. A Union officer's widow left to raise her only son alone on an Illinois farm. She watched as Thomas at 19 ignored her pleas and joined the tide of fortune seekers heading west when news of California gold spread. He promised her he'd be back in 2 years with enough money to buy the neighboring farm and start a family of his own. For a while, it seemed he would keep that promise. In March of 1866, he wrote from San Francisco, brimming with excitement. He had done well enough, he said, and was carrying roughly $3,000 in dust and nuggets. He would be home by May, but May came and went, then summer, and still there was no word. At first, Elena told herself he was delayed, but by August, her patience gave way to determination. She would go to Missouri herself and follow his trail. She was not like other grieving mothers. During the war, she had helped process casualty reports and missing soldier lists, learning how to gather testimony, keep records, and spot inconsistencies. She carried that discipline with her into Missouri. In Springfield, she laid out maps, gathered Thomas's letters, and set to work like a field officer preparing for a campaign. Armed with his photograph, she traveled from inn to inn and trading post to trading post, asking careful questions and writing down every answer. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Everyone remembered Thomas, polite, curious, meticulous with his bills. And everyone agreed he was last seen leaving Sullivan's trading post on April 15, 1866. After that, nothing. When she finally arrived at the post in September, she expected evasions. What she found instead was unsettling precision. Patrick Sullivan greeted her with warmth and sorrow, producing neat records of Thomas's visit. He claimed he had urged the boy to take the main road to Springfield, warning him against back trails. He even provided a map marked with the safer route and names of supposed witnesses who could vouch for his account. Shaw stood by, solemnly adding that Thomas had reminded Patrick of his own brother back in Ireland. Elena left shaken not by suspicion, but by how convincing the brothers seemed. It wasn't until she was halfway back to Springfield that the unease clicked into focus. How had Patrick known so much about her son's private life? That he was her only child, that he had promised to buy a neighboring farm, that he carried exactly $3,000 in gold. Those details were in Thomas's letters no one outside her family had read. That night in her room at the Palmer house, she decided she could not go home. If lawmen would not act, she would. Renting a small house on Springfield's edge, she began a one-woman investigation. She created case files, mapped disappearances, and tracked commonalities. By December of 1866, she had documented 47 men who vanished after taking routes recommended by the Sullivans. The profile was consistent lone travelers, flush with money bound for distant homes where no one would raise the alarm quickly. Her breakthrough came not from maps or records, but from a fellow immigrant. Mary Catherine O'Brien, a seamstress in Joplin, who had grown up in the same Irish county as the Sullivans, hinted at something darker. She was terrified to speak openly, but even her half-whispered words suggested knowledge that could shatter the carefully constructed facade of the brothers. For Elena, it was the first sign she was no longer circling shadows. She was closing in on the truth. At a church social in January 1867, a casual remark changed everything. When Elena McGreedy mentioned recognizing the Sullivans' accents as County Cork, Mary Catherine O'Brien's face went pale. Lowering her voice, she warned, "Those men aren't who they say they are." Back in Ireland, people knew them by different names, and their reputations would curdle your blood. She revealed that the brothers were once known as Patrick and Seamus O'Malley fugitives from County Cork, who had fled Ireland in 1862 under suspicion of orchestrating roadside robberies that left travelers dead. Her own uncle, a constable at the time, had told her about their method: identify farmers traveling to market with cash, arrange for bandits to strike, and silence witnesses with cold efficiency. What they built in Missouri was not an accident. It was a perfected version of the same system they had practiced in Ireland. But Mary Catherine's confession carried consequences. 2 weeks after confiding in Elena, she vanished from her Joplin boarding house, leaving behind only a small bag of belongings. No one in the Irish community could explain where she had gone. Elena knew at once that the brothers had discovered her betrayal and silenced her. Now her own safety was at risk. Instead of retreating, she doubled down. If local lawmen would not act, she would build a case so ironclad that even the most corrupt officials could not ignore it. She realized the key was not in the missing men themselves, but in the money. Every victim carried gold, and that wealth had to pass through someone's hands to become spendable. Disguising her inquiries as ordinary business, she began haunting Springfield's financial district, watching banks, gold dealers, and currency exchanges. Soon, a pattern emerged. The city's largest money changer, Cornelius McBride, was handling suspiciously large transactions far beyond what his supposed mining contacts could justify. Many of his exchanges lined up exactly with the dates when travelers vanished after visiting the Sullivans. As she dug deeper, the true scale of the conspiracy came into view. McBride's exchange was just one part of a laundering machine that involved some of Springfield's most respected merchants, bankers, and even officials. The Sullivans weren't merely tolerated, they were protected, their crimes woven into the region's economy. Churches were built, schools funded, businesses launched, all with blood-soaked gold. The prosperity of the Ozarks was being purchased with the lives of nameless travelers. By February 1867, Nena had created a file as meticulous as any intelligence officer's report. She had mapped disappearances, collected witness accounts, copied financial records, and even secured physical evidence from sites where men had last been seen. But she also knew that placing this file in the wrong hands could undo everything. Local officials were either compromised or terrified. She needed someone beyond their reach. She turned to Captain James Hartford, a federal marshal in St. Louis, who had served with her husband's regiment. Known for his incorruptible honesty, Hartford had both the jurisdiction and the courage to act. In early March, she sent him a letter that was less accusation than dossier, laying out the evidence point by point and letting him draw the unavoidable conclusion Missouri's heartland was the stage for a vast murder-for-profit conspiracy. Hartford's reply was swift. He would come himself. But Nena must be cautious. He could already tell from her words that she had stumbled onto something more dangerous than banditry. What neither he nor she fully realized was that the Sullivans' web stretched further than they imagined. They had friends in law enforcement too, and word of Hartford's mission reached them within days. For the first time in 3 years, the carefully guarded empire of the Sullivan brothers was under threat, and their network was already moving to eliminate it. Captain James Hartford stepped off the train in Springfield on March 15, 1867, traveling under a false name, with as little official paperwork as possible. He knew the Sullivan network had eyes everywhere, and the last thing he wanted was word of his presence reaching the wrong ears. His first meeting with Nena McGreedy took place in the basement of a Lutheran church chosen for its quiet seclusion. For 3 hours, she laid out her files, maps, ledgers, testimonies, and financial records piece by piece. Hartford, a veteran of both war and law enforcement, had seen his share of violence, but never anything this calculated. Mrs. McGreedy, he told her, staring at her charts, this isn't simple banditry. What you've uncovered is organized crime. They've built an economy on blood. Hartford knew they couldn't wait. The longer they delayed, the greater the chance that someone inside the network would alert the conspirators. On March 18th, federal agents launched simultaneous raids on Sullivan's trading post, Cornelius McBride's currency exchange, and the homes of half a dozen suspected accomplices. The results confirmed Nena's worst fears. At Sullivan's post, agents ripped up floorboards to reveal a hidden chamber. Inside were ledgers documenting hundreds of travelers, along with watches, jewelry letters, and photographs haunting fragments of lives cut short. More chilling still were Patrick Sullivan's private notes written with the precision of a surgeon. One entry described Thomas McGreedy in cold clinical terms, young Irish-American approx. $3,000 gold dust, traveling alone to Illinois. Mother is widow. No other family members to inquire quickly. He even listed the date route and the crew assigned to kill him. The most damning evidence came in the form of financial records. Patrick had kept meticulous accounts of profits and payoffs. Every murder's spoils were divided like dividends. Sheriff Thomas Dalton received a fixed $200 per victim. McBride pocketed 15% on every gold-to-currency exchange, and even Springfield's mayor, Robert Crenshaw, collected monthly sums that outpaced his official salary. At McBride's exchange, agents uncovered the laundering system in full. Stolen gold had been melted, converted, and reinvested in businesses across Springfield, creating an economy propped up by murder. Local shops, banks, and even churches had unknowingly, or in some cases knowingly, thrived on blood money. Meanwhile, investigators searching Widow's Creek, where Thomas was last supposed to have camped, dug up shallow graves. Personal belongings lay buried with human remains, bones showing clear signs of violent death. But the most shocking discovery came from Sheriff Dalton's personal safe. Bundled letters traced his partnership with Patrick Sullivan back to 1864. One note written by Sullivan in September 1866 read, "The McGreedy woman persists. Her son's case was most profitable. She becomes a danger. Perhaps she should join him on the devil's backbone." Dalton's reply was blunt. Killing a woman risks federal eyes. Better to arrange her accident when she returns to Illinois. Provide her route and it can be done clean. The correspondence made plain that Elela Nina had been marked for death, spared only because she had refused to leave Missouri. As word of the arrests spread, the conspiracy's breadth came into focus. Merchants, bankers, and even clergymen had taken their cut. Businesses collapsed when their books were tied to stolen wealth. The currency exchange shuttered. Springfield's First Methodist Church nearly went bankrupt when investigators revealed its building fund had been padded with laundered gold. And then Patrick Sullivan, cornered by evidence and knowing the gallows awaited, confessed. He told federal agents that between April 1864 and March 1867, their network had murdered 127 people. Each death was planned like a military operation. Each killing was part of a machine that turned blood into currency and currency into power. What had begun as whispers about missing men on a lonely Ozark road now stood revealed as one of the darkest criminal enterprises in post-Civil War America, exposed by the stubborn courage of a grieving widow and the relentless pursuit of a federal marshal unwilling to be bought. The scale of the Sullivan murders shocked even hardened investigators. All told, the victims had carried more than $400,000 in gold and currency, an unimaginable fortune in the 1860s. Patrick Sullivan, far from expressing remorse, described their work with pride. "We weren't bandits," he told federal agents. "Bandits are sloppy chasing small rewards. We were businessmen. Information is worth more than weapons, and planning removes risk while multiplying profit." His brother Shaw spoke with the same chilling detachment, recounting killings like battlefield maneuvers. Victims were dispatched swiftly, often by conspirators the men thought were allies. Their deaths were staged to resemble ambushes or accidents, bodies hidden in places no one would stumble upon. The confessions contained an even more terrifying revelation. The Sullivan Network was not alone. They had communicated with similar groups in other states, swapping methods and occasionally coordinating. Murder for profit had become an interstate industry. The Sullivans were not anomalies. They were part of a larger trend of organized violence feeding on the chaos of post-war America. Their trial in St. Louis federal court opened in October 1867 and riveted the nation. Newspapers dubbed the case the Missouri Murder Machine. Jurors heard from Elela Nina McGreedy, who laid out her meticulous investigation, as well as federal marshals who described the ledger's relics and bodies unearthed along the devil's backbone. The story was unlike anything Americans had seen before, not ragged highwaymen, but a disciplined system of killing and laundering wealth, supported by sheriffs, bankers, and city leaders. In February 1868, Patrick and Shaw Sullivan were convicted of 127 murders and hanged before a crowd of more than 3,000. Their final words were devoid of repentance. Patrick reportedly told the prison chaplain, "We gave those men quick deaths. That's more mercy than most of them would ever find." Dalton McBride and more than a dozen others received long prison terms. For many families, the verdicts finally brought closure after years of uncertainty. For Elela Nina, the outcome was bittersweet. She had exposed one of the most elaborate criminal conspiracies in American history and brought justice to her son's killers. Her determination earned her national praise, and the federal government even offered her a position in its fledgling investigative service, the seed that would later grow into the FBI. She turned it down, choosing instead to return to her Illinois farm. But victory came with a price. The details of Thomas's last days, read aloud in Patrick Sullivan's confession, haunted her until her death. She had found the truth, but no comfort. The Sullivan case left lasting marks on the nation. Federal authorities expanded patrols along major routes and improved communication between state agencies to prevent similar networks from flourishing. Yet the greatest lesson came not from laws or patrols, but from the betrayal of trust. For 3 years, the Sullivans thrived not through open violence, but by convincing travelers and neighbors alike that they were honest, dependable men. Their murders were built on hospitality maps and friendly advice. Hellhound Crossing was reduced to ashes after the investigation, but its memory lingered. Locals avoided the spot for decades, many swearing they felt an unshakable unease passing the place where so many had vanished. Federal records of the case were sealed, fueling speculation that similar networks had been uncovered elsewhere. And in 1902, when railroad crews stumbled upon a mass grave of 47 bodies along the Devil's Backbone, it became grim proof that the true extent of the Sullivan murders may never be fully known. When construction crews uncovered that mass grave in 1902, 47 sets of remains hidden along the Devil's Backbone trail, the horror of the Sullivan legacy deepened. Many of the personal effects buried with the dead matched descriptions in the original case files, confirming that even Patrick and Shaw's confessions had not revealed the true extent of their crimes. The discovery raised chilling questions. Had the brothers been operating longer than investigators believed? Were there more undiscovered killing grounds scattered through the Ozarks? And perhaps most unsettling, had some of their accomplices escaped punishment and carried the enterprise into other regions? By then, Elelena McGreedy herself was gone. She died in 1894, still haunted by the violent fate of her son. Yet her personal papers donated to the Illinois Historical Society revealed that she had never stopped investigating. She tracked disappearances across the frontier, convinced that the Sullivan ring was only one piece of a broader network. In her final notes, she identified suspicious patterns in Colorado, Nebraska, and Texas incidents that mirrored the Missouri killings with uncanny precision. A letter she began drafting to federal authorities, found unfinished among her papers, hinted that she was on the trail of conspiracies just as dark as the one she had exposed in the Ozarks. The final mystery of the Sullivan affair is not in what was proven, but in what remained hidden. Federal authorities counted 127 murders. Patrick's ledgers suggested more. In his last confession, he hinted at special arrangements for certain high-value targets, men whose wealth or influence made them worth extraordinary efforts. But he died before naming names. Modern historians suspect the brothers may have been responsible for disappearances far beyond Missouri cases of prominent figures whose deaths were written off at the time. Among them, a California legislator lost en route to Washington, a mine owner who vanished between St. Louis and Chicago, and at least 3 federal officials whose sudden deaths were never tied to the conspiracy. The Sullivan case, even more than a century later, remains a grim reminder of how easily trust can be weaponized, how murder can be turned into industry, and how many answers may still lie buried along forgotten roads. The trading post at Hellhound Crossing was rebuilt in 1889. But no matter how honest the new owners tried to make it, the place never escaped its reputation. Travelers refused to stop, and within 2 years the business failed. The road itself was later bypassed, and today the old intersection lies hidden under thick forest, reachable only on foot. Yet in the Ozarks, the Sullivan name has never faded. Over time, their story blurred into folklore. Some say the spirits of their victims still linger along the Devil's Backbone, whispering warnings to those who wander too close. Others claim descendants of the conspirators still live quietly in the hills, bound by the same code of silence that once shielded the brothers' crimes. What makes the case so unsettling, even more than a century later, is not just the scale of the murders, but the ease with which the Sullivans carried them out. They weren't monsters with supernatural power or geniuses beyond their time. They were observers, planners, and manipulators who understood the dangerous simplicity of trust. They picked their victims with care, created believable stories to explain their disappearances, and used a web of corruption to ensure investigations went nowhere. Their story is a warning that evil often comes wrapped in respectability, that the friendliest smile may be the sharpest knife. Federal law enforcement still carries the scars of the Sullivan case. Missing persons databases coordinated investigations across state lines, and heightened scrutiny of disappearances along major travel routes all trace part of their origins back to what was uncovered in the Ozarks. But perhaps the Sullivans' darkest legacy is the doubt they left behind. How many other networks like theirs operated in the confusion of post-Civil War America? How many vanished travelers were the victims of quiet, organized murder instead of random misfortune? And how many similar operations might exist even today, hidden behind polished facades and supported by corruption too deep to expose? The most terrifying crimes are not those committed in the shadows, but those carried out in plain sight by people who seem trustworthy, helpful, and ordinary. For 3 years, the Sullivan brothers thrived because they knew something most of us would rather not admit. People want to believe in the goodness of their neighbors. They took that instinct and turned it into a weapon. So what do you think? Was the whole truth about the Sullivan conspiracy ever revealed? Or do the classified case files still conceal darker connections? We may never know. Share your theories in the comments. And if you want more stories where history and horror intertwine, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit the bell, and share this story with someone who loves America's darker past. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem most eager to help.